Red Line Logbook here for Wistoria Chapter 2. We start off with Professor Walkner explaining how you get into the upper college. There are two ways. You either A, create original magic, and that will automatically get you into the upper college, or B, while you're at this academy, you must earn a significant amount of points within the 6 years you were enrolled there. Now, obviously, the people who create original magic are extremely rare, and so it's more common to go through the school route. And then he starts to yell at all the students in the class because these are all the students that are on the verge of failing and not getting enough points to graduate. And so he's giving these supplementary lessons as a way to help them do such that. And of course, Will, a person who has 0 points in the practical portion of the school, is of course one of these nearly failing students. After the supplementary lessons, Will and Clennett are now walking down the hall after really kind of Professor Walken to give supplementary lessons because it's something that Professor Edward would never do. And as they're walking down the hall, they pass by a group of students who are currently listening to the story of how Thawne defeated an evil sentinel all on his own. Of course, Thawne isn't the one saying this. Thawne is humiliated by the idea that people believe this. The ones who are making this claim are his two friends who were knocked out by the evil sentinel before they saw what actually happened. When Thawne sees Will walking by, his shame overwhelms him. He runs over, yells at him, but then marches off. This is a heavy indicator that Thawne will either become Will's rival or they'll become friends somehow. We then jump over to the principal's office where we meet Principal Colbron, an old woman, currently having a meeting with Professor Edward. And he is demanding that Will be expelled. And she questions, he's already in his 6th year. I don't see why we should expel him now when he's almost graduated. And the reason why Edward is so determined to expel Will now is because of the fight he saw, where he killed an evil sentinel. He cannot believe and refuses to accept a sword that can defeat a wand. The principal then points out that they're going to need as many strong people as possible when that day comes, most likely the sky falling. And Will, based on his skills and academic brilliance, he would make a great magic engineer, botanist, or whatever else is needed, a true sage. But that's when Edward points out he doesn't want to be a sage, he wants to be a magi wanda. And the principal says yes, that is a problem. So, I'll let you test him. You will give him a test, I won't interfere. If he fails, he's expelled. But if he passes your test, you must drop this. Back in the library, Will and Clennett are currently studying history. The history they're studying is the Battle of Grolzonzo. It's a battle between two species from other worlds. It's unclear if this means other dimension or other planet, but I'm going to assume dimension. The dwarves and the elves. And apparently, the elves who had magic used to oppress and borderline enslave the dwarves who did not have magic. And so the dwarves decided to rebel with an army of 10,000. Will points out to Clennett that he actually feels a kinship with these dwarves, strong warriors who did everything they can to oppose magic. And this story is actually what taught Will to never give up. That's when Professor Edward shows up and takes Will with him, saying that this is a supplemental lesson. He takes him to the practical training hall, where he tells Will that this is going to determine if he stays or if he goes. So the way the test goes is quite simple. All Will has to do is get one strike in on Professor Edward. If he does that, he wins. Otherwise, he's expelled. He then starts firing off black flames at Will, a spell called Dox Devacanas. Then we jump over to the professor's office where she invited Walkner into her office to witness the test. Of course, Walkner is against this because Edward is a reacher, someone who just failed to become a Magi Wanda, which means while he isn't considered the strongest mage in the continent, he's right below them. Back at the fight, Will is being launched around by the flames. He points out that this is actually a low-level darkness spell and yet it has so much power, proving that Professor Edward is still holding back, which is the only way Will has any chance of surviving this, let alone winning. Will goes in to kick Edward, but he activates a spell called Dengir, which is a shield made of darkness. He then tells Will that he's only going to use these two spells as a handicap. Will has no way of getting past the shield and also getting hit by the flames. Apparently hurts like hell, he said. But even worse than that is that Edward decides to then show him what real fear is. And he produces a shit ton of magic circles, basically planning on bombarding him with the flames. While just being toyed with and burned like crazy, the only thought Will has is if only he had a sword. That's when his jeweled beast, Kiki, takes off. It finds Clennett, who is currently worried about Will because she knows how Professor Edward hates him, and Kiki is basically beating on Will's locker. She realizes what Kiki's trying to tell her, grabs Will's sword, and takes off. Back to Will, he is currently in the ground, and that's when Professor Edward decides to give him a lecture on the Battle of Gerzonlonzo, the battle that he saw Will studying before. He says that there were 10,000 warriors, and they were all defeated with magic. But how many opponents did they have? The answer was 1. A single mage took down 10,000 warriors, which is why Will never amount to anything. He starts stomping on Will's head, but that's when Will just starts to push his leg up, and you actually see the muscles in Will's hand alone, not even his full body, just his hand. Every inch of this kid's body is just ripped, apparently. And Will declares he doesn't care that a single wizard defeated 10,000 warriors. He wants to be a Magi Wanda anyway. Professor Edward continues to abuse Will and demands what is his reason, why would he go this far? And Will then gives his reason, which is he wants to stand by the woman he loved. And Professor Edward, once again, is a reacher, someone who tried to be a Magi Wanda and failed. So he had all kinds of reasons deep inside of him. We don't know what they are, but they apparently mattered a lot to him. So when Will said that his goal to become a Magi Wanda was just to be with a woman, that pisses him off to no end. In fact, Professor Edward seems a little insulted that the only reason Will has. That's when Clinette shows up and finally tosses Will his sword. Will then gets serious by lowering his goggles, and the fight continues. Edward then fires another flame spell at Will, but he cuts it with his sword. Apparently, Will's sword is made of mithra, which is able to cut through magic. This, of course, irritates Edward even more, but he also said meaningless because he can mass produce his spell, and he creates so many this time, like way more than he did the other time when he was bombarding Will, and Will can feel it. He starts to feel nothing but fear at the very sight of just how much of a barrage is about to come at him. Because in the end, it doesn't matter if Will can cut through magic. If he gets overwhelmed, he can't cut through everything. Even though he's afraid, Will doesn't back down. Because the story isn't done. In the battle of 10,000 versus 1, there was one dwarf, the general, who was able to make it to the elf, to the mage, and inflict a blow of his own. And Will believes he can do the same. Will is smart. He doesn't just fight. He uses his environment to his advantage. Instead of trying to take on the magic barrage head on, what Will does is he just launches himself into the air above Professor Edward, and actually behind him, and then kicks off the roof. He comes down with one large swing, cutting through the magic barrier, protecting Edward. Will still hasn't gotten a hit in yet, so he swings around. At the same time, Edward swings around to respond, and Will is able to nick Edward's face before Edward blasts him with who knows how much magical power. Edward then lowers his wand, starts to walk away, and says, "I reward Will 5 points in practical." And that's when Clinette runs over to Will because he just passed the fuck out. Poor kid is beaten to hell. As for the principal, she's very pleased. She definitely sees a future for Will. It's clear her plans go far into the future, whatever they might be. Alright, if you enjoyed this video, subscribe, give it a thumbs up so you enjoy more Wistoria and other anime things. Thank you and have a great day.